The rescued night sky above the alien planet was alive with strange lights. Shadows moved across the forest as the human explorer walked carefully. His ship had crashed hours ago, and he was still searching for a safe place. Every tree looked twisted, every sound felt dangerous, but he pushed forward, carrying only a small pack and a broken flare gun. Suddenly, he heard a sharp cry in the distance. It was not an animal cry, it was a voice full of pain, full of strength. He froze, listening. The sound came again, echoing through the trees. Something inside him told him to run away, but his heart told him to follow. He moved quickly through the glowing plants and thick fog. His boots sank into the wet ground, and strange insects buzzed around him. Finally, he reached a clearing. There, under the pale light of 2 moons, he saw her. A tall alien warrior lay against a broken tree. Her armor was cracked, her spear was broken, and her skin was glowing faintly. Blood ran down her arm, and her breathing was heavy. She looked strong, but also fragile in that moment. The human stared, his mind racing. She was not human. Her body was built for battle. Her eyes were sharp and golden. She looked like a storm wrapped in flesh. Yet she was bleeding, struggling, almost collapsing then. The forest shook. From above, searchlights cut through the fog. Strange flying machines passed overhead, hunting, searching. The warrior looked up with hatred, whispering something in her language. She was being hunted. And he had walked right into her war. The human had a choice. He could hide and stay alive, or he could help this alien warrior and risk everything. His chest tightened. His mind screamed to run, but his feet moved forward. He knelt beside her, carefully raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Her golden eyes locked on him. She reached for a hidden blade, but her hand trembled. He whispered softly, "I can help you. Don't fight me." She did not understand his words, but something in his voice stopped her. Slowly, she let her blade fall. The human opened his pack and pulled out a small medical kit. His hands shook as he cleaned her wound, wrapping her arm. The warrior winced but did not push him away. Above them, the machines circled closer. Their lights moved across the trees, searching for her. The human grabbed her shoulder, pointing toward the shadows of the forest. He whispered again, "We have to move." She understood, not the words, but the urgency. With great effort, she pushed herself up, leaning on him. Together they stumbled into the dark forest. Every step was heavy, every sound too loud. The hunter. Machines passed close, beams of light slicing the air. The human held his breath, praying they would not be seen. Finally, the machines moved on. The forest fell silent again. Only the sound of her weak breathing remained. They stopped by a fallen tree, hiding in the hollow. The human looked at her wounds again. She was strong, but she could not survive alone tonight. She studied him with sharp eyes. Her kind had always seen humans as weak, as outsiders, but this one had risked his life for her. Why, she did not know. He whispered his name, placing his hand on his chest. She tilted her head, repeating the sound roughly, almost like a growl. Then she touched her chest and gave her name, a name filled with pride and fire. It echoed in his ears, strange yet beautiful. The human smiled, and for a moment there was trust. But the night was far from safe. The forest still moved with hidden dangers. The machines would return, and enemies were close. The human knew this was only the beginning. He had saved her life, but he had also stepped into her war. As the moons rose higher, the 2 strangers sat together in the shadows. One was human, one was alien, yet their fates were now tied. He did not know who hunted her. He did not know why she carried the weight of a whole tribe, but deep inside he felt it. This was the moment that would change everything. And in the distance, unseen by them, red eyes watched from the dark. The hunt was not over. It had only just begun. The secret of the warrior. The forest was quiet, but it was not safe. The human sat beside the wounded alien warrior inside the hollow of the fallen tree. Her golden eyes were half closed, her breathing heavy, but her spirit was unbroken. He could feel the weight of her presence. Even when she was weak, she was more than just a soldier. She was something greater, though he did not yet know it. Hours passed. The strange twin moons rose higher, casting silver light through the branches. The human tried to rest, but his mind was restless. Why was she being hunted, and who were the machines in the sky? He wanted to leave, to find his shipwreck. Again, to signal for rescue, but every time he looked at her, he felt the same pull. He could not abandon her, not now. When the first light of dawn touched the alien sky, the warrior stirred. Her body was strong, healing fast despite the wounds. Her kind was built for survival, but even so, she needed him. Slowly she opened her eyes and studied him. Her gaze was sharp, but no longer filled with suspicion. There was something else there, a question, a judgment. The human spoke softly, pointing to her arm, showing her the bandages he had made. She looked down, touched them, and then raised her eyes back to him for the first time. She made a sound that was not a growl. Her voice was deep, powerful, but now soft. She spoke her language slowly, carefully, as if testing him. The words meant nothing to him, but the tone was not hostile. He tapped his chest again, repeating his name. She listened, then tried to shape the sound, her accent sharp, broken, almost like thunder. The human laughed lightly, shaking his head, her lips curved, not a smile, but something close. Then she gave her name again. Clearer this time, it rolled like fire, a sound that carried pride and weight. He repeated it clumsily, and her eyes narrowed, but she did not correct him. The silence between them grew heavy. The warrior finally spoke again, her words long and flowing. She pointed to the sky where the machines had flown, her voice filled with hate, her hand clenched into a fist. Then she pressed that fist to her chest, her eyes burning. Even without understanding her language, he understood her meaning. She was hunted by powerful enemies, and her honor demanded that she fight them. The human frowned, staring at her broken spear. She noticed his look, and her hand moved over the weapon with care. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol. Her people must have lived by strength, by battle. The way she touched it was like how humans touch a flag or a family heirloom, sacred, unbroken in spirit, even if the weapon itself was cracked. As the day warmed, the forest around them grew alive again. Strange birds with glass-like wings circled above. The air filled with the hum of unseen insects. The human felt uneasy, as if the world itself was watching them. Then, in the distance, came the sound of drums, faint but steady. The warrior stiffened, her eyes narrowing. She knew that sound, and fear flickered across her proud face. It was the sound of war, the sound of her enemies, marching closer. She tried to stand, her body trembling with weakness. The human moved quickly, holding her steady. She hissed in her language, shaking her head. She did not want his help, but her body betrayed her. In the end, she leaned on him, her pride wounded, but her spirit burning bright. They began moving through the dense forest. The human guided her slowly, keeping her weight on his shoulder. Every step was a battle for her, but she refused to collapse. She was a warrior, and warriors did not crawl. At last, they reached a rocky slope overlooking a valley. And there, he saw an entire army moving through the land. Hundreds of figures, armored and armed, their banners glowing with red light. The machines he had seen before circled above them like vultures. The warrior growled low, her teeth bared. She pointed at the army, then at herself, then at the forest behind them. Her meaning was clear. She was the target, she was the one they hunted, and they would burn down the whole world to find her. The human's heart pounded. Why was she so important? Why would so many hunt one warrior? He turned to her, searching her eyes for answers. At last she placed her hand on her chest again. Her voice strong despite her weakness. She spoke words that carried weight, words that made his skin prickle. Though he could not understand, he felt the meaning. She was not just a soldier, she was a leader, a daughter of warriors chosen to carry her people's honor. Her tribe's hope rested on her survival. The human stared at her in silence. She was more than he imagined. He had not only saved a life, he had stepped into something much larger, something that could decide the fate of her people. Maybe even more. The drums grew louder. The army was spreading through the valley. They did not have much time. The human tightened his grip on her, whispering words she could not understand. "We'll make it, I promise." And in that moment, though they came from different worlds, something passed between them, an unspoken bond. Not of language, not of culture, but of survival and trust. The secret of the warrior was clear now. She was not just an injured fighter. She was a symbol of her tribe, the last flame of resistance. And by saving her, the human had lit that flame. Even brighter, whether he wanted it or not, he was now part of her fight. And the galaxy itself seemed to shift, waiting for what would come next. The first attack the valley below was crawling with enemies. The human and the alien warrior watched in silence, hidden behind the rocks. The sound of drums echoed through the alien air, heavy and endless. The army moved like a river of fire. Banners glowing, machines hovering above them. They were searching for her, the wounded warrior, and they would not stop until they found her. The human's heart beat faster. He had never seen such power. This was no small hunting party. This was a full invasion force. And he was only one man, stranded with broken tools. But beside him stood the alien warrior, her golden eyes sharp even in pain. Her pride would not allow fear to show, though her body trembled from blood loss. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of hounds, strange beasts, half metal and half flesh, released by the enemy to hunt through the forest. The warrior stiffened, her hand tightening on the broken spear. She knew what was coming. The first wave, the first strike. The human grabbed her arm gently, whispering, "We can't fight them all. We have to move." She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. Together, they slipped back into the trees, moving as quickly as her injuries allowed. The forest was alive with shadows. Every step they took, the enemy grew closer. The ground shook with the weight of armored beasts. The trees glowed faintly with alien light, as if warning them of danger. Then it happened. From the mist, 3 hounds appeared, their bodies covered in silver plating, their jaws glowing with red heat. They growled in unison, their eyes fixed on the wounded warrior. The human froze, pulling her behind him. Though he knew he had little to fight with, he raised the broken flare gun, the only weapon he had left. The hounds charged, their claws tearing into the ground. The human fired. The flare exploded into bright fire. The first beast yelped, blinded, and crashed into a tree, but the other 2 leapt forward. Faster than his eyes could follow, the warrior roared, her voice carrying the power of her tribe. She swung her broken spear, the tip still sharp, and drove it into the nearest beast's throat. Sparks flew as the creature fell, twitching violently. The last hound lunged at the human, jaws wide. He ducked just in time, rolling on the ground. His hands scrambled for a sharp stone, and in a desperate strike, he drove it into the beast's eye. It shrieked and collapsed beside him, smoke rising from its body. Silence fell again, broken only by their heavy breathing. The warrior looked at him, her chest rising and falling. Her eyes held surprise. This fragile human had stood against her enemies and lived. She gave a short nod, sharp and full of respect. It was the first sign that she saw him not as prey, not as a burden, but as an equal in the fight. But their moment of victory was short. The sound of horns filled the air, long and cruel. The enemy knew where their hounds had fallen. They were coming now, fast, and in numbers too large to count. The human pulled the warrior forward. They ran deeper into the forest, dodging branches, leaping over roots. The sound of pursuit grew louder, armored soldiers moving fast behind them. The human's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Not when her life depended on it. Then the forest opened into a ravine, a deep cut in the earth. A narrow rope bridge stretched across it, swaying in the wind. The human looked back. Figures were already breaking through the trees. He grabbed her hand, pulling her onto the bridge. The wood groaned under their weight. The ropes creaked dangerously. Halfway across, the first arrows flew, glowing red in the air. The warrior raised her broken spear, deflecting some, but one struck her shoulder. She cried out, but did not fall. The human pulled her forward. Desperate to reach the other side, more arrows rained down. The ropes began to fray. With one last effort, they stumbled onto solid ground. The human turned, his eyes wide as the bridge collapsed into the abyss. The enemy on the other side stopped, snarling in frustration, but their horns sounded again, and the hunt continued. The warrior fell to her knees, clutching her wound. Blood dripped between her fingers, her breathing ragged. The human dropped beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding. He whispered again, "Stay with me, don't give up." Her eyes met his, fierce despite the pain. She growled something in her language, her voice strong even now, though he did not understand. He knew what she was saying. "I will not fall, not here, not now." The human bound her wound as best as he could. Then he heard it, the sound of machines moving closer. The forest trembled under their approach. They had won one battle, but the war was far from over. The warrior pushed herself to her feet, leaning on him. Her pride would not allow her to stay. Down, together, they moved again, vanishing into the deep forest. Behind them, the enemy roared in anger. The hunt was growing stronger, and soon there would be no place left to run. But in the warrior's eyes burned a new fire. For the first time, she saw not just a fragile human. She saw a fighter, a survivor, someone who could stand beside her, and though she would never say it, not yet, a seed of trust had been planted. A bond born in blood and danger, and in the silence of the alien forest. Fate was already writing the next chapter. Arrival at the alien tribe. The journey through the forest felt endless. The human and the warrior moved slowly, her weight leaning on him, her strength fading with every step. But her spirit never broke. Her eyes burned with a light that refused to die. For hours they climbed hills, crossed streams, and hid from the enemy patrols. At last, as the suns dipped low in the alien sky, the trees began to thin. Ahead, a faint glow lit the horizon, strange and shifting, like fire dancing in the mist. The warrior raised her hand, signaling for silence. Her golden eyes searched the shadows, sharp even in her pain. Then she spoke a word, soft but full of meaning. He did not understand it, but he felt the weight of it. It was the name of home. They moved closer, and the human's breath caught. The forest opened into a wide valley, and there it was, an alien village, unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall towers of black stone rose into the sky, twisted like spears, glowing with faint blue veins of light. Bridges of bone and metal connected the towers, swaying in the wind. At the center, a great fire blazed, its flames green instead of red. Around it, hundreds of figures moved. Her people, her tribe. They were tall like her, strong and armored, their bodies marked with glowing patterns that pulsed like living energy. Some carried weapons carved from crystal, others wore cloaks of dark fur. Children with bright eyes ran between the fires, their laughter echoing through the air. The human stood frozen, his heart racing. It was a world completely alien, and yet alive with the same pulse of community, of family, of belonging. The warrior stumbled, and the human caught her. A sudden cry rose from the village, sharp and loud. Dozens of heads turned, and in a wave, the tribe froze. They had seen her, their fallen warrior, returning with a stranger at her side. In moments, the valley erupted with motion. Warriors ran forward, weapons raised, their voices harsh and commanding. The human raised his hands, showing he meant no harm, but the sight of him, small and weak beside their proud warrior, filled their eyes with suspicion. One of them shouted, his voice like thunder. The human could not understand the words, but he understood the tone, an order, a threat. The alien warrior pushed away from the human and stood tall. Her body trembled, but her voice carried power. She raised her broken spear and shouted a command. The other warriors froze, their weapons still raised, but their eyes shifted. The human watched as respect flickered across their faces. Whatever she had said, it carried weight. They formed a circle around them and led them into the heart of the village. The human felt hundreds of eyes on him, some curious, some hostile, some full of awe. The children pointed, whispering. The elders sat by the fire, their cloaks heavy with feathers and bone charms. They watched him with cold silence, as if measuring his soul. At last, the warrior and the human were brought before the chief. He was taller than all the others, his armor covered in glowing runes. His face was lined with scars, and his eyes burned with fire. When he spoke, the earth seemed to tremble. The warrior answered, her voice strong despite her pain. Their words clashed like steel, sharp and heavy. The chief's gaze shifted to the human. Narrowing in suspicion, one elder rose, pointing a clawed hand at him. She spoke with anger, her voice echoing across the fire. Others nodded, their eyes filled with distrust. The human knew what they were saying even without words. He was not welcome, he was an outsider, he was weak, and weakness had no place among them. But then the warrior raised her voice again, louder than before. She struck her spear into the ground, the sound echoing like thunder. Every eye turned to her. Her words burned through the air, her chest heaving with pride and fury. When she finished, silence fell, heavy and absolute. The elders whispered among themselves, their eyes uncertain. The chief stared at the human for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and sharp. One by one, the tribe lowered their weapons. The human realized what had happened. She had defended him, claimed him before her people. Without her, he would already be dead. But with her words, he was alive, though barely accepted. Still, the silence around the fire was thick. The tribe did not trust him, not yet. They looked at him as if waiting for him to fail. The chief raised his hand and spoke again. The warrior translated only with her eyes, a warning. He would not be trusted until he proved himself. That night, the human was given a place by the edge of the village, a small shelter made of bone and cloth. Guarded on all sides, he sat alone. The alien night pressing in, the sounds of drums echoed across the valley, slow and steady. He looked toward the fire at the center of the village. There, the warrior sat among her people, her head held high, but even from a distance, he felt her eyes on him. She had tied his fate to hers, and now the whole tribe was watching. The human lay awake long after the fires died, his heart heavy with fear. He was among a people who could kill him in a heartbeat, but he had saved their warrior, and that gave him a chance to prove himself, a chance to live. What he did not know was that this night was only the beginning. The trials were coming. The tribe would test him in ways he could not imagine, and failure would mean not just his death, but the loss of the fragile bond he had begun to build above. The valley, the stars shone cold and distant, and far beyond them, unseen, his own world felt farther than ever before. He was alone, but he was no longer just a survivor. He was part of something larger, dangerous, and strange, and though fear filled his heart, another feeling grew inside him too, a spark of belonging, a seed of destiny, one that the tribe themselves had not yet seen, but soon, very soon, they would. Trials of trust. The dawn came with the sound of drums, low and steady at first, then louder, echoing across the valley. The human woke to the sight of shadows moving outside his shelter. Dozens of warriors stood waiting, their eyes sharp, their weapons glowing faintly in the rising light. He did not need words to understand. Today was the day of his trial. The alien warrior stood at the front, her arms still wrapped in bandages, her eyes fixed on him. She gave no smile, no comfort, only a nod. It was her way of saying, "Be ready." The human swallowed hard and stepped out, feeling the weight of the tribe's eyes upon him. Children whispered and pointed. Elders muttered in low tones. Warriors crossed their arms. To them, he was still weak, still nothing but an outsider clinging to their warrior's favor. The chief raised his hand, and the valley fell silent. He spoke in a deep, booming voice that shook the air. The human did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear when warriors dragged out strange objects. A heavy stone disc carved with runes, a tall wooden frame with ropes and weights, and a pit filled with sand and sharp bones. The trials were ready. The first challenge was strength. 2 warriors stepped forward, their bodies marked with glowing patterns, their muscles like carved stone. They lifted the heavy rune disc easily, holding it above their heads as the crowd roared. Then the disc was set before the human. He stepped closer, the weight of hundreds of eyes burning into him. He crouched, gripping the cold stone, his arms trembling even before he lifted. The disc did not move at first. Laughter rippled through the crowd, harsh and mocking, but he gritted his teeth, dug his heels into the ground, and pulled. His body screamed in pain. But slowly, inch by inch, the disc rose. The crowd gasped. The laughter stopped for a brief moment. The human held it above his head, his arms shaking violently. Then the disc fell, crashing into the dirt. The warriors smirked, unimpressed. But the alien warrior's eyes shone with something else: pride. He had not matched their strength, but he had refused to quit. The second challenge was endurance. The human was bound to the tall wooden frame, ropes tied to his arms and legs. Weights were attached, pulling at his body. The crowd chanted as the ropes pulled tighter, testing his will. The warriors before him had stood for hours without breaking. Now it was his turn. At first, the strain was unbearable. His shoulders felt like they were tearing. His breath came in short gasps, sweat pouring down his face. The crowd began to murmur, expecting him to fall, but he closed his eyes, remembering the night in the forest, the hounds, the bridge, the warrior bleeding in his arms. If he could survive that, he could survive this. Minute after minute passed, his body trembling, his vision fading. At last the chief raised his hand, ending the trial. The ropes were cut, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The crowd was silent, not out of respect, but out of surprise. The weak human had lasted longer than they believed possible. The final challenge was the trial of courage. The human was led to the pit filled with sand and sharp bones. In the center of the pit stood a beast, chained but furious. It was larger than a man, its body covered in spines, its eyes glowing with fire. The warriors shouted, their voices filled with excitement. This was no simple test. This was survival. The human was given no weapon, only a wooden staff. The beast roared, snapping its chains, its body shaking with rage. The human's heart pounded, fear clawing at his chest. But then he looked up, and his eyes met the alien warrior's. She was watching him, her gaze steady. She had risked her honor to defend him, and now he had to prove her faith was not wasted. The chain broke, and the beast charged. The human dodged, the sand flying under his feet. The creature's spines tore the air where he had stood a moment ago. He struck with the staff, but it bounced off the creature's armored hide. The crowd roared, some in laughter, some in bloodlust. The beast swung again, its claws grazing his arm. Pain flaring through his body, he stumbled, almost falling onto the sharp bones. But then he remembered the hounds in the forest, the stone he had used, the way he had fought with desperation. Survival was not about strength, it was about cleverness. He looked around, saw the broken bones scattered in the sand. He dove, grabbing a jagged piece, sharper than the wooden staff. When the beast charged again, he leapt aside and drove the bone deep into its eye. The creature shrieked, collapsing in the sand, its body thrashing before it finally lay still. The pit went silent, then erupted. In shouts, some cheered, some cursed, some looked at him with new respect. The chief rose, his eyes burning as he studied the human. The alien warrior stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. She shouted in her language, her words sharp, her hand pointing at him. The crowd listened, their faces torn between pride and disbelief. He had not won like a warrior of their tribe, but he had not failed either. He had fought with the only weapons he had, his will, and his mind, and in their eyes, that was enough to keep him alive. That night, the human was no longer kept at the edge of the village. He was given a place near the fire, close to the warrior he had saved. The tribe did not yet call him brother, but they no longer looked at him only with hatred. The children whispered his name, trying to shape it with their tongues. The warriors still tested him with hard stares, but some gave him nods of respect. The elders spoke quietly, their voices full of caution and curiosity. As the fire burned high, the alien warrior sat beside him. For the first time, she spoke a word in his tongue. Broken but clear. Strong, she said. Tapping his chest, the human looked at her in surprise, then laughed softly. It was only one word, but it carried more weight than 1,000. He was no longer just a stranger, he was something else now. Something the tribe would have to face, and though he did not know it yet, the trials had not only earned him a place in their village, they had placed him on a path he could not escape, a path that would lead to war, to fire, to destiny. The great battle. The night was heavy with silence. The human sat near the fire, his body aching from the trials, his mind still replaying every test. The tribe no longer looked at him as only an outsider, but as someone who had survived, someone who had endured. Yet respect was not the same as belonging, and he could still feel their eyes on him, sharp and doubtful. The alien warrior sat across from him, her golden eyes reflecting the flames, her face calm but unreadable. For a moment, he thought the village might finally rest, might finally breathe, but fate had other plans. The first sound came like thunder in the distance. A low rumble, steady and growing. The elders looked up sharply. The warriors reached for their weapons. The human frowned, straining to hear, and then the sky split with light. Flaming arrows rained down from the cliffs, striking towers and shelters. Explosions lit the night. Shaking the ground, the tribe erupted into motion, warriors shouting, children crying, drums pounding like a heartbeat of war. The enemy had come. And they had come with fire. The human stumbled to his feet, shielding his face from the heat. The warrior rose beside him, her broken spear clutched tightly in her hands, her wounds forgotten. The chief shouted orders, his voice booming over the chaos. Warriors rushed to the barricades. Others formed lines around the elders and children. But even the strongest knew the enemy was many, far too many. The forest trembled as armored beasts broke through the trees. Hounds of metal and flesh roared, tearing into the defenses behind. Them came soldiers, their armor glowing red, their weapons sharp as fire. The battle began with a scream that shook the valley. The human grabbed a fallen warrior's weapon, a crystal blade glowing faintly in his hand. It felt heavy, wrong in his grip, but he held it anyway. He rushed to the barricades, where the enemy had already broken through, the air filled with the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, the roar of beasts. He swung wildly, clumsy but desperate. The blade cut into an enemy soldier, sparks flying. The warrior appeared at his side, her movements sharp and precise, each strike filled with deadly grace. She fought like a storm, her broken spear moving as if it were whole. Together, they pushed back the first wave, but the enemy did not stop. More soldiers poured into the valley, their banners glowing crimson, their horns sounding victory. The human's arms ached, his breath came in ragged gasps. Every swing felt heavier, every step slower. He knew he could not outmatch them in strength. If he stayed on the barricades, he would fall, and so would the village. Then an idea struck him, sharp and sudden. His mind flashed back to the ravine, to the collapsing bridge, to the way he had survived not through power, but through wit. He looked around the battlefield, searching, the glowing towers, the bridges of bone, the fires spreading through the valley. The village itself could be their weapon. He shouted to the warrior, pointing to the bridges above. She followed his gaze. her eyes narrowing as she understood. Together, they climbed one of the tall towers, the crystal stairs shaking under their feet. Below, the battle raged, the enemy pressing harder, the tribe struggling to hold them. At the top, the warrior raised her spear. Cutting through the ropes of the nearest bridge, the heavy structure swung loose, crashing down onto the enemy below, crushing dozens. The crowd roared, their voices lifting with hope. The human moved quickly, setting fires along the other bridges. The flames spread fast, weakening the supports. When enemy beasts tried to cross, the bridges collapsed beneath them, sending them crashing into the fire. The tide of battle shifted, if only for a moment. But victory was not yet theirs. From the shadows of the forest came a new figure. A warlord, taller than all others, his armor black and burning with crimson light. He carried a massive blade, his voice like thunder as he roared. The enemy cheered, their strength renewed. The tribe faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. The chief stepped forward, his scarred face calm, his weapon raised. He met the warlord in the center of the battlefield, their blades clashing with a sound like thunder, splitting the sky. The two titans fought with fury, their strikes shaking the earth. The human watched, awe and fear filling his chest. This was not a battle he could join. This was something greater, something ancient. But he knew the truth. The chief was old, his strength fading, and the warlord was fresh, his power unstoppable. The fight ended in a single terrible moment. The warlord's blade pierced the chief's chest. The elder warrior staggered, his eyes burning with pride even as life left him. He raised his hand to the sky and shouted one final word. Then he fell, the earth shaking as his body struck the ground. The tribe cried out in grief, their hearts breaking. The warlord roared in triumph. Raising his blade high, the enemy surged forward, their voices rising in victory. The battle seemed lost, but then the human stepped forward, his blade trembling in his hand. The warrior looked at him, her eyes wide. She shook her head, but he only tightened his grip. If the chief had fallen, then someone else had to rise. The tribe would not survive without a leader. He was not strong. He was not one of them, but he had survived the forest, the hounds, the trials, and now the battle. And sometimes survival itself was enough, he shouted, his voice breaking but loud. The tribe turned to him, their eyes filled with confusion. He raised his blade, pointing it at the warlord. The warrior stepped beside him, her spear raised. Together, they stood before the tribe, two figures against an army. The people hesitated, their grief heavy, their fear deeper. But slowly, voices rose. Weak at first, then stronger, a chant, his name, broken and strange on their tongues. It spread like fire until the valley shook with it. The warlord sneered, his eyes burning with hatred. The human's knees trembled, but he did not move. The warrior's voice cut through the air, fierce and unyielding, and for the first time, the tribe looked not at weakness, but at courage. The great battle was not over, not yet, and its true ending would decide the fate of them all. Asterisk. The new leader, the valley was burning. Smoke rose into the alien sky, glowing red under the light of the moons. The ground was littered with the fallen warriors of the tribe and soldiers of the enemy. The chief lay still where he had fallen, his blood soaking the earth, his weapon broken beside him. The warlord stood tall, his blade dripping with fire, his eyes blazing with cruel triumph. The tribe trembled, their hearts heavy with grief, their voices caught in silence. It seemed the battle was lost, and with it, the spirit of the people. But then the human stepped forward. His body was weak, his arms heavy, his wounds burning. Yet something inside him burned brighter than fear, brighter than pain. He had seen death, he had faced beasts, he had survived every trial they had thrown at him. Now he stood where their chief had fallen, his voice rising above the silence. He shouted, raw and broken, but filled with fire. It was not their language, but the meaning carried through his spirit. "We are not finished," he roared. "We fight. We live." The tribe turned to him, their eyes wide. They saw not the fragile outsider who had stumbled into their valley. They saw the human who had lifted the runestone, who had endured the ropes, who had slain the beast in the pit. They saw the one who had fought at the barricades, who had cut the bridges, who had stood beside their warrior when all others doubted. The chant began again, his name, broken and strange on their lips. It spread like wildfire, louder, stronger, until the valley itself seemed to shake with it. The warlord snarled, raising his blade. The human's legs trembled, but he did not back away. The alien warrior stepped beside him, her golden eyes blazing, her broken spear raised high. Together, they faced the enemy leader, two figures against a giant. The warlord charged, his blade slicing through the air. The human barely dodged, the ground shaking beneath the strike. He countered with a desperate swing of his crystal blade, sparks flying as steel met steel. The warrior attacked from the side, her spear striking deep into the warlord's armor. The beast roared, slamming his massive arm into her, throwing her to the ground. The human cried out, his fury breaking free. He attacked again and again, each strike clumsy but fueled by will. The warlord laughed, swatting him aside like a child. Pain tore through the human's body as he hit the ground, blood filling his mouth. The warlord raised his blade for the killing blow. But then, through the pain, the human's mind cleared. He saw the battlefield, the fires, the broken towers, the weapons scattered in the dirt, and he remembered he could not win by strength. He could only win by survival, by cleverness, by being what he was. As the blade came down, the human rolled aside, grabbing the jagged shard of bone buried in the sand, the same kind of weapon he had used in the trial of courage. The warlord turned, laughing at the sight of the weak human crawling in the dirt. But the human did not crawl. He rose, his eyes burning with defiance. When the warlord swung again, the human ducked under the strike and drove the shard deep into the beast's neck. The warlord staggered, his roar turning to a choking cry. The alien warrior, bloodied but unbroken, rose behind him with one final cry. She drove her broken spear through his chest. The warlord fell to his knees, his massive blade clattering to the ground. Then he collapsed, lifeless, his body shaking the earth. Silence fell across the battlefield. The enemy soldiers froze. Their leader gone, their courage broken. The tribe roared, their voices shaking the sky. The enemy turned and fled, vanishing into the forest like shadows before the dawn. The battle was over. The human dropped to his knees, his body trembling, his chest heaving with every breath. The warrior stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes burning with pride. The tribe gathered around them, their faces filled with awe. They had seen what no one thought possible. The outsider had stood against the warlord, and with the warrior's help, had slain him. The elders stepped forward, their cloaks heavy with ash and feathers. They looked at the fallen chief, then at the human. Their voices rose in low tones, heavy with ritual and meaning. The human did not understand the words, but he understood their eyes. They were no longer filled with doubt, but with recognition. The tribe was leaderless, their chief gone, and in the fire of battle, a new leader had risen. The warrior knelt before him, her golden eyes shining. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head. Her voice rang clear, strong despite her wounds. She spoke words that echoed through the valley. "He saved me," she said, her tone fierce. "He saved us all." The tribe fell silent. Then one by one, they knelt. Warriors bowed their heads. Elders lowered their staffs. Children pressed their hands to their chests. The chant began again, louder than ever. His name carried on the voices of hundreds. The human stared in disbelief, his chest tight, his heart racing. He had come here as a stranger, a survivor clinging to life. Now he stood as something else, something greater, a leader. The fire blazed higher, green flames licking the sky. The tribe surrounded him, their voices rising in unity. The warrior stood beside him, her pride shining like the sun. The elders placed the fallen chief's cloak across his shoulders. Heavy with honor and history, the human's knees shook under its weight. But he did not fall. He looked out over the valley. over the people who now called him theirs. He had not asked for this. He had not dreamed of it. But fate had chosen him, and he would not turn away. Far above, the stars burned bright, silent witnesses to the moment. The human stood tall, his voice steady as he spoke into the night. "I am with you," he said, his words simple but unbreakable. The tribe roared in answer, their voices shaking. The heavens, and in that moment, he was no longer just a man lost on a strange world. He was their leader, their hope, their flame in the darkness, and the galaxy itself trembled, knowing that a new chapter had begun.